I'm ProzaicMuze, bringing you a multi-strafe guide for Diablo 3's Demon Hunter class. This build combines the large AoE spread of multi-shot with strafe's on-the-go damage for non-stop monster slaying. Up front, this is not a dedicated strafe build, so don't be surprised if I'm not strafing at every possible opportunity. I will discuss aspects of a pure strafing build throughout the guide though. I find this build particularly fun, but I am aware and will warn you that it doesn't scale well in its current form. We use multi-shot with suppression fire and strafe with drifting shadow on the mouse, while companion with bat companion, preparation with punishment, shadow power with gloom, and impale with awareness round out the QWERTY keys. To support these resource heavy abilities, we grab the passives Vengeance, Archery, and Night Stalker. The goal is to use the multi-shot preparation combo to fuel Impale and Strafe. These abilities provide you a flexible set of options for ranged, mobile, or melee targets. I'm currently geared for and focused on the lower monster power levels, but adjustments can be made to shift towards a more traditional tanky strafe build if you're into that. Bat Companion's only function in this build is to facilitate the use of your spenders. I've reached the point where I can use strafe and multi-shot in certain situations indefinitely. With proper itemization and a slow two-handed crossbow, you don't actually need this extra hatred, but it will allow you to make use of frenzy shrines and attack speed in general without breaking the build. Punishment plays a vital role in allowing you to convert discipline into hatred. You really can't get away with excluding generators without it. Keep in mind that by foregoing the discipline refill, you are going to have a harder time using multiple discipline spenders. Choose them wisely. Gloom is this build's emergency button. It provides significant lifesteal and a respectable amount of damage reduction. I've reserved it specifically for affixes like Jailer and Reflect Damage for when I have little choice but to man up. It's also an important way of lumping lifesteal into Strafe's snapshotting mechanic, which wasn't removed in the recent patch. I'll cover this in greater detail later on in the guide. If you've opted for stacking defensive stats and using Strafe with Demolition, Blood Moon provides an insane amount of healing. You can snapshot it into both Strafe and Chakram with Shuriken Cloud if you decide to go that route. Shadow Glide is entirely optional and really only worth it when you don't need the damage reduction of Gloom or the extra healing of Blood Moon. The extra speed doesn't lock into Strafe's snapshot, so you will need to actively cast it. It doesn't work well in this version of the build, but can be very efficient in a pure Strafe build. Awareness is the end goal of most encounters with elite packs. Multi-shot clears out trash while damaging the pack, Strafe gets you into the right position, and Impale bursts them down the rest of the way. The secondary AoE stacks with the single target damage for a total of 340% weapon damage. I find this perfectly suited for packs with a gold champion given how much health it has compared to the weaker blue elites. Chemical Burn is a great source of damage for bosses. You don't need awareness if you're overgeared to the point that multi-shot is killing packs in a few volleys, or if you're using Strafe with Demolition. By periodically using Impale to refresh the dot, especially with fast attack speeds, you can net more damage than Strafe alone. Grievous Wounds is worth mentioning for those with a very high crit chance, but it loses value the more crit damage you already have. If you have more than 353% crit damage, Awareness will win out given that Grievous Wounds only adds crit damage rather than doubling the total value. Suppression Fire is this build's bread and butter. It can handle most situations and allows you to generate enough discipline to use punishment and continue the cycle. Assuming you're using Night Stalker, you can gain enough discipline through crits for punishment by having the cost of multi-shot with fire at will. This doesn't change how the build functions, but it does double the time it takes to run out of hatred. This gives you more time to sit on discipline in case you need to use shadow power. Full Broadside is really only for those fortunate enough to have a Legacy Natalia set. If you're one such individual, you should be able to work this in for the extra damage without much trouble. Drifting Shadow does the least damage, but it's the only rune that gives you your full move speed. This is important as you shouldn't be trying to tank everything. Being able to kite normally while still dealing damage is the main reason for using Strafe. If you're determined to tank with Strafe anyways, Demolition is how you do that. It's a bit awkward to use with the bounce mechanic, but I'll show you how to deal with that later in the guide. For whatever reason, the proc rate is doubled, meaning more healing from life on hit and lifesteal before ever considering multiple targets. Rocket Storm makes for a great option against bosses, especially if paired with Chemical Burns. The rockets can all hit the same target for a considerable amount of burst damage while the dot runs in the background. Think of it as a half step between Drifting Shadow and Demolition. The passives aren't very flexible given that Vengeance and Night Stalker are practically required for sustaining resource consumption. Archery is somewhat optional, but I don't see much value in other passives unless you dramatically change the build. For this reason, the only alternative I'd recommend is Tactical Advantage if you dump Impale for Vault or Smokescreen and trade Drifting Shadow for Demolition. This will let you overcome the slower speed while also providing a way of breaking or avoiding crowd control. Companion summons a bat. It looks like this. Preparation completely refills your hatred. It looks like this. Shadow Power gives you wings. They look like this. Impale's effectiveness against packs shouldn't be overlooked. By popping Shadow Power for lifesteal, it provides a reliable way of tanking damage for short periods of time as needed. It is also your largest source of single target damage, but does a poor job of maintaining your discipline to hatred cycle. If you're running out of hatred before a pack dies, you don't have enough damage for the monster power level you're running, or rely too heavily on Shadow Power. Multi-Shot is great at clearing trash whether spread out or clumped. Its near instantaneous damage makes it easy to see whether or not you need to fire another volley before moving on. With hatred management being a large part of the build, this is very important. What makes Multi-Shot so effective is that the more targets you hit, the easier it is to keep hitting them. There will be times you can hold the button down while cycling punishment as needed. It is also capable of killing elite packs on his own, and typically does enough damage to kill them before you run out of hatred and discipline. This isn't the most effective way to handle things, but it means that you can certainly use it to do damage from afar if you're hesitant to move in for Impale. Strafe does a great job making a mess. The random nature of its targeting means you'll break everything you didn't know was breakable. By stacking Hatred Regen with a slow two-handed crossbow, you really don't need to worry about running out of hatred while you're using it. If somehow you do, Punishment's got your back. You can also run over health globes for both hatred and discipline through Vengeance. One major reason we're using Strafe in this build is that you don't collide with mobs while it's active. This ensures that you are never cornered unless you want to be, as you can simply run through whatever's in your way, doors included. This feature makes chasing down goblins rather trivial whether they're on their own or hiding in a group of mobs. Your multiple sources of AoE and mobile damage make running a sport. One major concern, however, is that Jailer completely shuts Strafe down. Not only do you stop moving, but you can't even use it while rooted. This is another reason we have Impale, as without Vault or Smokescreen, we pop Shadow Power and tank through it. Another weakness is its pitiful performance against tightly packed trash. Here you can see that I'm hardly making any progress while almost dying. Drifting Shadow is not for clearing trash. It can be effective when you need to kite an elite pack that can do more damage than you're comfortable with though. Your killing speed is slower and it's not as efficient, but this pack eventually dies without risking much. Should you opt for Demolition, your ability to kill trash and tackle elite packs is drastically improved. The bouncing mechanic means that you'll have an easier time hitting closer targets and should stay on top of whatever you want dead. This is also the perfect opportunity for using Shadow Power for snapshotting, as you'll heal to full every few explosions. The more targets you hit, the less likely you'll ever drop low enough to notice. Speaking of noticeable health loss, if an axe falls in the dungeon and you're the only one to see it, does it deal any damage? Better yet, if a fire erupts in a dungeon, because that makes sense. Moving on to stat requirements, there are only a few things you need to focus on: crit chance, hatred regen, max discipline, and overall damage. Crit chance is important for triggering Night Stalker, otherwise you don't have a good reason for using it. Hatred regen and max discipline make the build better in general by making each cast of punishment more valuable while increasing the number of refills you have available. Damage is important only because this build doesn't have much endurance beyond Shadow Power. You need enough to kill things before you run out of resources. For Monster Power 1, 400 resistances, 4,000 armor, and 35,000 plus health gets you started, with more health being needed if you want to focus on Demolition. You're going to take hits while strafing through mobs, so you need a large enough health buffer for the lifesteal to actually be effective. Whether or not you need lifesteal on your weapon depends on whether you use multi-shot or strafe more. A strafing build can rely on Shadow Power, while a multi-shot build tries to save Shadow Power for emergencies. The Natalia set isn't required, but I've found the 2 and 3 piece bonus worthwhile and affordable if you don't try to get perfectly rolled set pieces. You can get a helm without crit and boots with low dex because the bonuses make up for it. You don't need the Impale cost reduction, it just worked out that I found it on a Natalia's chest piece at a very low price. Picking up multi-shot crit chance on your quiver and a Stone of Jordan is also worthwhile if you're not focusing on strafe. For me, it's like having 17% crit on my quiver and a Stone of Jordan with a stat it normally can't have. I have 48% global crit chance, but 60% with multi-shot. The bonus versus elites is also very useful for bursting down packs with Impale. If you've seen the Hand of Ytar guide for the monk, you might have guessed I'm using the Templar for the same reason. The hatred regen isn't quite as impressive as spirit regen, but is still a good idea to get along with the other defensive abilities the Templar offers. Focusing on strafe makes this less of a requirement and allows you to switch to either of the other followers. To check out my gear, look in the description box below for the d3up.com link. Here are some clips showing how Frenzy affects both this build and the Demolition variation. If after watching this guide you're interested in learning more about a pure strafe build, I've put links in the description box to a pair of guides from the Battle.net forums. I recommend reading both. I might make my own build guide down the road, but I feel there is enough reliable information out there for the time being that I can focus on other less known builds. That aside, I'm going to start aiming for 2 guides a week now that the patch is out and I don't have to worry about major game changes for at least a little while. I've also finished over half the Path of Exile guide series, but I'm holding on to that until I can release all of it but the endgame guide at once. I don't want anyone to get stuck waiting for a missing segment. Unless real life punches me in the face, I should have that finished and uploaded within a week. But for now, be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more suboptimal goodness.